In 2014, I'm gonna go back. Pretend like you didn't see that. In 2014, the comedian James Adomian dropped the mic on one of my favorite ideas about comedy and its connection with social change. He said, part of the magic of comedy is that you can force people who disagree with you or even hate you, you can force them to listen. Comedy is a deviant artistic form that's a kind of cousin to social justice because it requires us to see with a new lens. So I'm talking about one study today, but as you listen, I hope that you'll be able to hear in a more expansive way and think perhaps about your own work and maybe go on a little bit of a journey from being a skeptic, why comedy, to perhaps why not comedy. Oh my God, I went backwards again. Oh, I'm really not on track. Okay. I'm back. Okay. So I want to paint a portrait of one of the most devastating humanitarian crises that we face in our era, the Syrian refugee crisis. So in 2011, more than 6 million Syrians had to flee due to conflict and war and extremism. Millions more remain in Syria and are desperate for humanitarian assistance. So what this means, of course, is that millions of families are now refugees. They're in a kind of permanent state or temporary state of the unknown, an unknown future. From a communication and narrative perspective, Syrian refugees have been dehumanized. They've been reduced to being faceless, nameless victims. They're behind barbed wire. So two things are important to realize here. Western news frames have generally portrayed Syrian refugees as criminals and terrorists. This is an evidence-based idea. Further, the Trump administration has used these exact appeals to actually block supportive policies that would resettle refugees in the United States. But public opinion and attitudes about Syrian refugees really matters when we think about the backdrop of supportive public policy that will welcome refugees into the United States and communities across the country and in the world. So two ideas are simultaneously true from a communication perspective. The first one is that if we think of Syrian refugees as nameless, faceless terrorists and criminals, rather than moms and dads and teachers and professors, we won't support policies that help instead of criminalize. And the second thing is true, is that if we believe this problem is too huge and too impossible and hopeless and sad to try to rectify, we won't. So why comedy? So in a challenge like this one and many other dire social issues, how might we imagine comedy as a form of public engagement strategy? So social justice communicators like you all might be reluctant to think about comedy, but I hope that I can change your mind a little bit today. Comedy is actually understudied when we think about social justice as a broad arc of flow in terms of attitudes and beliefs and norms, not just immediate behavior changes in a public health context. But the ability of social change communicators to leverage narrative and creativity is a really crucial, irreplaceable part of social change because we make decisions based on emotions. So the big question and opportunity. So this study with my colleague Lauren Feldman examined a particular genre of comedy, satire, and its influence in terms of shaping attitudes about Syrian refugees. So what do we know first about how satire actually engages audiences? Well, first, satire is actually a discourse of social change. What we know is that satire is a form of social critique. It pushes against complacency. It requires us to see differently. It attracts attention to complex issues, and there's even evidence in the peer-reviewed literature that finds that if we experience a serious issue through comedy, we may pay closer attention to it over time with news, and it influences audiences. Okay, but here's the kicker. There's Samantha Bee. She's a grown woman in a bee suit. Can we take comedy seriously? Can we take messages seriously when they come through comedy? This is a really important idea. I hope it feels intuitive, but it's an important theoretical idea, and it's a very important practical idea. So what about message discounting? This is the major concern that usually comes up with social justice communicators. You might believe me that comedy attracts attention and amplifies messages, but what happens if people don't take my message seriously? seriously? I know you asked that question because that's why we designed the research this way. So in past research, also in the peer-reviewed literature, this idea of message discounting, dismissing something as just a joke, has actually been identified as a key impediment to comedy's persuasiveness. So our study is designed to look at these different issues, and we wanted to see what really is happening when we think about persuasion in comedy. So our key research questions were, can comedy shift attitudes about Syrian refugees? What is the effect of watching comedy and news, comedy compared to news? And can entertainment value, the idea that something is really funny, can it overcome this idea of message discounting? So we designed an experiment, and we randomly exposed a like-minded group of people. And by the way, this group, 18 to 64-year-old Americans, were not the choir when we think about Syrian refugees. They were agnostic, with descriptors that match the US Census. So what we did was we assigned people into 4 different groups. So one group watched a piece about the Syrian refugee crisis from Samantha Bee. I don't know if you all remember it from a couple years ago. She's obviously very funny. And another group watched a news segment on CNN. We had a third group watch comedy and then news, and then a fourth group watched news and then comedy because we wanted to see how those interact. Okay, and we were looking at supportive attitudes and feelings of compassion and empathy and willingness to help Syrian refugees with a public policy perspective. We looked at the issue of message discounting, and we looked at entertainment value. Okay, so what did we find? Very exciting. So what we found was that the news-only viewers had their positive attitude shifts towards Syrian refugees were significantly lower than any conditions with comedy, any of them. For the comedy viewers, the opposite was true. Positive attitude shifts were significantly higher than the news viewers. And comedy's route to persuasion through advanced analysis, which I won't tell you about because it's very geeky, but entertainment value was, in fact, the piece that overrode the message discounting. Okay, so what does this mean for you all? The big summary is that the perceived entertainment value of satire reduces message discounting and increases persuasion. This is actually an amazingly powerful finding for you all, social justice communicators, and for scholars. So comedy is social justice strategies. So through this study and others, we offer support for the idea that comedy is a powerful mechanism for social justice communication and is a reason to collaborate with professional comedians to create new art that disrupts these narratives that are harmful. So in this study, comedy alone makes people care more. Entertainment value reduces message discounting. And most importantly, this means that the comedy needs to be really funny. Don't pack it with 18 messages. That's not what you're doing with comedy. So that's very powerful to me. And so why not comedy? So I leave you with this final thought. In this social justice issue and others, comedy is not a luxury. It's not a silly idea. It is a serious symbiotic force that lives alongside news and information that can do something different. It allows audiences to feel differently. It serves as a source of civic imagination, allowing us to see not just what's impossible, but what it looks like when there's hope and optimism and light. So instead of why comedy, I would say to you that I think the more strategic question, and the one that offers the limitless possibility we need through comedy, is why not comedy? Thank you.